Okay, today we are going to make a tunnel card design, and we're going to be using designer series paper. And one of the things that I really like about this card is that there is an awful lot of design already in the card. You don't have to do an awful lot of stamping because you're using designer series paper, which has beautiful designs, beautiful colors. And there's also a nice little surprise inside. This is a tunnel, so we're going to be creating a tunnel. And you can see that there are many, many different ways to create tunnel cards. Different sizes, shapes, different orientations of your cards, different kinds of paper, obviously many, many different occasions. These two cards were made with 2 pieces of 12 by 12 designer series paper. And if I open these, you will see that the inside of the 2 are kind of the opposite in design. Where you see the green in one, you see the red in the other. That's because one of the cards used half of the piece of designer series paper, the other used the other half. This will make more sense in just a second. So let's just dive in, and we're going to make a couple of cards. It's just as easy to make 2 cards with this design as it is to make 1. Because what I suggest that you do is you start with 12 by 12 designer series paper that work together well. And my audio is not working well, Belinda.
You're breaking up. Is it just me or is it everybody?
No, it's me too.
Okay. Hold on, let me see if the audio, there we go. Is that any better? Can you tell at all? If I keep talking, I just changed the microphone, so that might be a little bit better.
That's better.
Yeah.
Better?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
better.
Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so you're going to start with 2 pieces of 12 by 12 designer series paper. And what I like to do is just make sure that the colors work together well. So obviously you can see the 2 that I've chosen on one side of the paper. And then if I go to the back side of these are pretty neutral patterns. And this is real red and garden green that I'm working with on these 2. So what I'm going to do when I end up making these 2 cards is, if I bring the original cards back, the more decorative paper will be on the outside. So these are what I would consider the more decorative of the 2 sides. This deer side is more decorative, I think, than the gingham. So I'm going to have this on the outside of one of the cards, just like I have the trees here. Then on the other card that I make, I'm going to have the snowflakes as the outside pattern, coincidentally, just like the snowflakes on here. And then the inside of the 2 cards will be these designs, which are kind of neutral, and they're going to not really be obtrusive. They won't scream at you when you open the card. So I really like having these as the outside. What we're going to do is, since we want the final card to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, which is a standard A2 size, we need to cut down the 12 by 12 into a sheet that will be 8 1/2 inches wide by 11 inches tall. Okay, so that sounds pretty easy and pretty logical, and it is. There are just a couple things you need to know when you do that. So if you have a piece of paper like this one, where there is a design and the design has a vertical view, obviously meaning when I make the card and I get done with it, I want my reindeer to be showing this way. I don't want the reindeer on the front of the card to be showing like this. So I need to make sure that I cut my paper in the right way. Well, here's my card folded out. So this is the 4 1/4, which means that this in total is 8 1/2. So I need to make sure that I'm cutting this to 8 1/2. And I need to make sure that I'm cutting down here to 11. So grab your paper cutter, grab your designer series paper, and what you're first going to do, because we need some scraps that we're going to use to do more decorations afterwards, is just follow this for a second. Orient your paper so that it is in the right view as if you were looking at it. And just turn it once and put it into your cutter, and you're going to cut 1 inch off the edge. And when you do that, when you get 1 inch off the edge, you're going to have a strip of paper, obviously 12 inches by 1 inch. And we're going to save this because we're going to use this to do some more designs on the card later. All right, so if I reorient this, I now have a piece of paper that on the bottom, I've cut off 1 inch. So this is going to give me my 11 inches. Well, now I need to get this to 8 1/2. So I am going to put this into my cutter, and I am going to cut it at 3 1/2 inches. 3 1/2 off of 12 is going to leave me at 8 1/2. So I'm just going to cut that at 3 1/2. And again, I'm going to keep this because I can use this later to do some more designing. Now, I want to show you what we've ended up with. And I am just grabbing a piece of cardstock. I'm grabbing a package of cardstock. And I just want to show you that essentially what you've done is you've created a piece of designer series paper that is 8 1/2 inches by 11. All right, so now that we have our regular A2 card size, what we're going to do is we're going to cut this like we are making 2 regular A2 cards. And that means, forget about the design for a minute, don't get all confused with that. On the 11 inch side, which is going to be the longer of the 2, you're going to cut that in half. So you're going to put that in at 5 1/2 and just cut that in half. And now you have 2 A2 size designer series paper pieces. And this is what we're going to be using in just a minute to make the card, or cards really. We've only cut 1 piece of our designer series paper. So I'm going to put this to the side, and we're going to do the exact same thing. So this is a review of what we just did, and we're going to do the exact same thing to the second piece because we want to get 2 card bases out of this as well. On this piece, I don't really care which side is up, down, it doesn't matter. It's all going to work the same way. But if I were looking at a piece that had a design, I would hold it so that I could see the design, and then I would flip it 1 time. And again, I've got a 12 by 12, so I'm just going to put this into my cutter, and I'm going to cut off 1 inch. And that is going to shorten one side to 11 inches. And keep this sheet because we're going to use it later. It has some really pretty designs on it that we're going to use on the card. Now what I have is 12 inches by 11 inches. I want to get this to 8 1/2 by 11. So on the 12 inch side, I'm going to bring it to 3 1/2 inches, and I'm going to cut that off. And again, if I were to look at a regular piece of A2 cardstock, this is the size that I now have. It's 8 1/2 by 11. regular old standard size. And if I want to make an A2 card out of this, I'm going to put that into my cutter. On the 11-inch side, I'm going to put that in at 5.5, and I'm going to cut that in half. So what I'm going to end up with out of those 2 pieces of designer series paper that I want to start working with is I'm going to have 4 card bases, if you want to think of them that way. I'm going to have 2 of each of the different designs that I started with. And you can see if I bring in the card, the example card, that it is 5.5 inches high. And if I fold this in half, you're going to see that it's 4.25 inches wide. Now what you need to do is decide how you want your cards to look. And let me explain what I'm talking about. I mentioned that on one of my cards, I want the deer to be on the outside. And I'm just going to take a look at the 2 pieces of paper that I've cut that have the deer on them. And I'm going to look at the right-hand side because that is going to be the front of the card and figure out which one I want. And I like this one on the bottom better because it has this full deer on the top and it just looks a little bit more complete. So I'm going to use that one as the front of one of my cards. So I can flip that over. I'm going to flip over the other one. And then I'm going to look at the other 2 pieces of card that I have. And these don't really matter because there's not really a pattern that is particularly interesting. Although I will say I kind of like that snowflake a little bit more, the way that that one's sort of oriented. So I'll probably use this as the front and this as the middle. Okay. So I know that this is going to be the front of one of my cards. I know this is going to be the front of one of my cards. I know that's going to be the middle of one, and that's going to be the middle of one. And now you have fun because you don't have to have this green one be the middle of the green. I'm going to switch it around so that I'm going to have the red go in the middle of the card that has the green on the front. And I'm going to have the green on the middle of the card that I have for my deer. So this is how I'm going to have my paper. And this will be the front of one, this will be the middle, this will be the front, and this will be the middle. And I'm going to just go ahead, I'm just going to work on one right now. So what I've done is I've just brought it down to 2 pieces of paper. I know that this will be the front of my card. This will be the inside of my card. So essentially when I get done and I have everything put together, the card will look like this on the front. And then this will be the piece that I'm going to cut the tunnel out of. And behind the hole where I cut the tunnel, I'll see that red gingham. So let's talk about how we're going to do this. Let's look at that first piece, that deer, and we're going to go ahead and score it. And we're going to score it just like it's a normal piece of card, like a base. It's an A2 base. This is 8.5 by 5.5, which means we need to score it at 4.25, just like a normal card. So I'm just going to fold that or score it right in the middle at 4.25. And you can go ahead and fold that in half. And this is going to end up being the front of the card. So there I have my card front, which is the equivalent in this case of the card that has the trees on it. So the front is really simple. The front is an A2. The back right now is an A2. It's really the inside that we need to talk about. And the inside on this card is the paper that is red. So it's this piece here, it's the center, and it's this piece on the side. That red is going to be equivalent on the new card to this piece of green. So what you need to do, and just follow me along here, and then it will make sense as we do it. This is the inside piece, and I've oriented it so that it's facing me as far as the color that I want people to see. The color that I'm going to cut the tunnel out of. I'm going to score that at 4 1/4, right in the middle. Then I'm going to go over to 2 1/8. And we all know that the 1/8 is between the 2 and the 1/4. So right at 2 1/8, I'm going to score that. And then I'm going to completely move my paper. I'm just doing it 180 degrees. So I can still see that I've got that 4 1/4 score in the middle. This is the score line that I did the 2 1/8, and I'm going to do a 2 1/8 on the other side. And all I'm doing here is, this is 8 1/2. So I scored it in half at 4 1/4. Then I'm scoring half of this. So from the 4 1/4 to the edge, half of 4 1/4 is 2 1/8. So I've scored it in half, and you don't want to fold this just yet, but you're scoring it in half, and then you're scoring it again 1/4 and 3/4. So you're going to have 3 lines. What we want to do next is we're going to die cut our tunnel. And this is where you can use any shape that you want. On this one, you can tell I used a circle. But you can use, and the one that I'm going to do today, I'm going to use a square. You can literally use any shape that you want to use. The only limit is you do not want your die cut to be wider than the 2 score lines that are on either side. You want to die cut in between these 2 score lines. And I'm going to use a square. I'm going to try, really not going to get completely technical on this, but I'm going to try to cut this in the middle visually between these 2 lines. It really doesn't matter if you get the die cut in the middle vertically, but horizontally, just give it your best shot. And I'm going to have mine a little bit higher from the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and die cut that. I know die cutting is not the most exciting thing to watch, but I'm going to put that onto my die cutting plate. And I'm using a couple pieces of very lovingly worn washi tape. The mustache washi tape has gone, miracle of miracles. And I'm just going to tack this down and run it through my die cutting machine. And then we will do the next stage. So while I do that, I'll just bring that back in for 2 seconds. But go ahead and die cut your tunnel shape out of the middle. And what's nice about the designer series paper as well is it is going to cut easier in some respects than cardstock because it is thinner. So you should not have any issues getting your shape die cut. Be super careful when you're taking off any kind of washi tape that you have, or you might even have some post-it note that you're using to hold that down, just so you don't tear your paper. And save that piece that you die cut because you may be able to use that for something else. You never know. And then you're going to end up with a piece that looks like this. So what we've done is, rather than using the circle, I've cut the tunnel using a square this time. Now, the next thing that we're going to do, I'm going to bring the front back in. The way that the tunnel is folded is, if you go to the middle, you're going to fold that toward you. And go ahead and give that a nice little burnish. And then at the 2/8 score, you're going to fold that so this is what it looks like to this point. I've folded the middle of my tunnel toward me. I folded the 2/8 away from me. And then on the other side, where I have the 2/8 score from the edge, I'm folding that away from me as well. You're going to end up with something that, if you stand it on its side, it looks like a W. And the W, the middle of the W, is going to be the tunnel. Because here's where we're going with this. We're going to end up adhering the tunnel to the middle of the card. Okay. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a second and make sure, number one, that people are at this point. And I want to, while we're making sure people are at this point, I want to give you a couple of options of how you can attach your paper. And the way that I did it, and it's kind of hard to see because there are many different colors here, but the paper that I actually attached, the piece that looks like this on this card is the one that's green. So the red that's over here is actually on top of the green. And the green goes from where my thumb is to where my thumb is. I did not put it all the way to the edge of the card. I purposely brought it in just a little bit, and I'll tell you why. There are two reasons. One is, visually, if you have not cut your paper to exactly the same size, and I can see that my paper is not exactly the same, and I'm going to let it go. You could visually see it on the edges if you bring it all the way over to the edge. The other thing is, and this is just me, but if you bring it all the way over to the edge and you adhere it, there is a chance that your card, when it's folded, could get folded like this, because these two pieces of paper are the same length. And if it gets folded all the way down, that tunnel's not going to pop up. So if you adhere the cards together with just a little bit on the edge showing like that, this tunnel piece will always pop up. Physically, it is impossible for that to flip backwards, and it will still fold with absolutely no problem. The other reason is, if you fold everything together, inevitably there's going to be some part of this that is going to stick up, like the middle piece of mine is sticking up a little bit. So if I put this flush against the edge, I'm going to see the middle piece on the edges. So again, it's just me. So what I'm going to do is grab my glue, and I am going to only work one side at a time. And I'm putting glue on the side that is going to get adhered. So this side, underneath this side, is where I just put the glue. I am making sure that I have this oriented so that I know what the top of the card is. I'm going to turn that. I know this is the top, and I am going to just do one side at a time, and I am going to do my best to get that about as straight as I can, and then I'm not going to worry about it, and I'm just going to press that down.
She is going to let it go.
I'm letting it go. Now, the best way to get the other side even is to fold this all up. To put glue on this side now, and then to fold the other part of the card on top. That way you're going to be assured that it's nice and flat and it's going to open up the way you want it to. So I've glued this side down. I'm going to fold this all together and I'm going to put some glue on this side. And you don't need an awful lot of glue. I don't put as much glue on designer series paper as I do on cardstock. I find that the glue works well on designer series paper. And if you put a lot, you can also get some bubbling. So I've got that glued. I'm just holding this down and I'm going to bring my card base over and just flatten it. And now when I open up my card, I can see the tunnel. Now let's pause here for 2 seconds because I want to show you another card that I made in a horizontal view. Did the exact same thing, but this is using cardstock. And you have 6 layers of cardstock here. You've got the front and back of your card. You've got 4 pieces of the inside when it folds into a W. So you've got 6 thicknesses of cardstock. This gets to be pretty thick. So when you do it with designer series paper, I don't know if you can see the difference, but there's a real difference. And it's really much easier to work with the designer series paper. Plus you don't have this major hole in the back. Now you can do these in cardstock, and this is one that I started in cardstock. I will tell you one thing, if you decide to do anything in back of your tunnel where you're stamping, stamp before you put the score line in. Always stamp before you score, because if you do it in reverse, you will not be able to stamp into the crevice that you create when you score. So stamp before you score. But back on this one, let's kind of talk about where we are now and what you might want to do to finish your card. And there are a ton of options. So if I bring back in the one that I did, one thing that I did is I used paper from the scraps to put some more color on the inside. And that's what I'm going to do on this one. So I am going to go back to the pieces that I cut. For example, I have a 1 inch by 12 inch of the pattern that is seen in the tunnel. I am going to cut this in half and get a 1 inch by 6 inch piece. And I'm going to use that to decorate each of the sides a little bit. And this is obviously optional. You do whatever makes you happy. But I'm going to go ahead and just cut that. And because our card is 5.5 inches high, we've got a little bit of leeway. We're going to be able to cut off the excess. And I'm going to eyeball this. I'm not really going to worry much at all about if I have everything perfectly aligned top to bottom. And as I'm putting the thicknesses of designer series paper, it's really not getting so thick that it won't go through the mail easily. And I'm just going to wing this. I'm going to say, yeah, kind of in the middle-ish. That's good enough. What I'm doing with this piece is I'm trying to get one end of that piece that's 1 by 6 so that it's flush with the bottom of the card. And then I know that it's straight, sort of, hopefully, because by default it should be straight. It's going to give that a little bit of a burnish. And then I'm going to grab my scissors, turn this over, and I am just going to go right along the edge and cut off the excess. And it will look like there's kind of a continuation of the design going from the edge into the middle. It's a little bit of an eye trick, which is kind of cool. I'm going to take that other piece 1x6 and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And, you know, obviously this is where you can mix and match if you like patterns from other cards. You know, if you do a lot of these and you use many patterns from different designer series papers, you could have some really cool color combinations that you might want to use. And again, I'm just going to eyeball this, pretend that I've got it in the middle. I'm putting it right against the edge as best as I can and laying it down. And theoretically, that should be pretty straight. Give that a little bit of a burnish. And then I'll turn that over and grab my scissors and just cut off the excess. So I like how it kind of captures the reds and the greens and they all work together. It looks much more intricate than it is. It's pieces of paper that have been cut and put on top of each other. And then if you want to get a little more fancy, I'm using some of the sparkly paper that was part of the celebration. And I won't do this now, but you can see that on the ones that I put a little more bling on, I added a little bit of that on the inside. So you can go back and decorate these as much as you want. One thing I do caution you on is when you are decorating cards like this, don't put a lot of thick embellishments in these cards. There's enough thickness already. And if you start adding additional pearls or things that really stick up, it's not going to lay flat. Do the embellishments with the bling and dimension on the front. Let the inside kind of speak for itself. And you could really, you know, dress this up if you wanted. If you had cut a circle that would work with a wreath like this, you could put the wreath, you would just bend the wreath in half. So there's still many, many ways to add bling, and you can figure that out. The next thing that I wanted to show you, and it's what I did. It doesn't mean it's what you do. I wanted to put a sentiment on the back. And the way that I did this is a little different than the way that I've done sentiments in the past. This sentiment folds. It's easy enough to read because the script is big and it's one that people recognize. It's not a sentiment of words that takes a minute to figure out what they are. So you don't have to do this. I actually showed this prototype to Belinda earlier in the week, and she came up with a really good idea. You could put a spinner here, you know, so you could put some string top and bottom, and you could put your sentiment on a piece of cardstock, and it would actually hang here when you place it up. You can also put your sentiment over on the side, and you could put some decorations in the back. So you don't necessarily need to put your sentiment there. But I'm going to show you how I did that in case it's something that you might want to do. What I did, and I did do this beforehand, and I apologize, but I didn't want to bore you guys to tears watching me die cut, is I stamped 2 of the sentiments from the, getting in here, the Merriest Moments stamp set. This is a really pretty one, and I use the Together is the Merriest Place to Be and A Joyful Christmas to You and Yours. And I decided that I wanted to use the same colors in the paper. So these are in real red, and then for the other card that I'll make, I use the garden green. And I went ahead and stamped, and then I die cut my piece, and I purposely die cut the square to be just a little smaller So I used 2 different square dies that are nesting dies when I did my die cutting. And the one that has the sentiments is the smaller of the 2. And then I'll show you the larger one is the one I used to do the tunnel. And when you have a piece that you have die cut and you've stamped and you want to put it, let's say you do want to put it in the back, just fold it. It's not, you know, super technical. Just fold it in half. And then you can burnish it a little bit if you want, or you can just burnish it with your thumb. And then what I'm going to do is actually glue that right in the back. And when you glue this, you do not want to put an awful lot of glue onto it. It will move around a little bit when you fold the card base. So I'm just going to put a little glue on one side, a little glue on the other. And then I'm going to do my best to center it. I'm probably going to stand up here just so I can look down at it and try and center it the best that I can. And then I'm going to move that card so that I can make sure that the sentiment is back in the corner. And then if you press one of the sides down and you get that nice and flush, you can just fold your card and press that down as well. And then you'll get the other side in. And then when you open up your card, you'll have that message in the back of your tunnel. And again, this is completely up to you. It's definitely not something that I think everybody would want to do. But I thought it was kind of different. It's something that I don't typically do. So I thought it was kind of cool. And again, there are millions of ways to finish the inside with bling or more paper. You could put some of the holly branches, you know, up underneath. If I cut these, I could put them up underneath and have them kind of peeking out. As long as you remember that this is going to fold, you just need to be mindful of where that fold is going to be. Then on the front, I did some pretty simple things on the front. And what I did with that is I wanted to bring out some more of the colors. So you'll remember that we used a scrap of what we had cut off to add these colors. Well, the front of the card is really more red-ish. And I think I want to add some of the green. I want to kind of bring it all together. So if I look back at some of the paper that I still have that has some of that green on it, I have some here. And it's going to be a little bit different in orientation. Well, actually, this is 5.5. So I'm going to use that 5.5. And I'm just going to cut a couple of pieces and kind of decide where I want them to go. And this is where you can figure out how wide you want them to be. On this piece, I cut it to 1 inch. I mirrored the size that I had on the inside. So I'm just going to grab my cutting board again. And this is the scrap that was when we cut the 3.5 inches off. And I'm just going to, I don't know, this time I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to do maybe just 1/2 inch and see what that looks like. Why not? So I'm going to do 1/2 inch, see if I like that. And then I have some extra paper that I can use on something else. And I kind of like that deer. I kind of want that deer to show on the final card. So I may put the green over here. And then I may put this piece that I'm going to end up putting my sentiment on down toward the bottom. We'll see how that looks. That's not bad. It kind of looks like a present, I think, that's wrapped up. But I do like those deer showing like that. So I'm just going to take an extra piece of the designer series paper and go ahead and put that on the front. And again, this is where you decide how many, what color, where you want them, if you want them, how you want it oriented. And this time I need to be careful because this is cut to 5.5. So thankfully it did fit. And then I've got a little bit of color on the front that is going to help blend in with the green on the inside. And if I wanted to, I don't know, let's see. Let's be crazy. I'm gonna go ahead and grab that cutting board one more time. This is the fun of it. You just gotta play. You just need to see what works, what doesn't work, what makes you happy. If there's something that you can add or subtract. And I might leave this and finish what I'm doing and then see if I want to add that piece in, but I might add that in as well. And then in terms of how to finish off the front, and I'm just going to bring the 2 cards back that I used as examples. It's up to you. You do what makes you happy. And you're going to have a lot of leftover paper. This is the paper I still have left over from one of the pieces or 2 of the pieces of designer series paper that I cut. And you can use them to create backgrounds for your sentiments that are going on the front of your cards. So maybe what you would want to do is, for the ones that I'm doing now, you could use the same square die that you use for your tunnel, cut out a piece of designer series paper and use that as the background for your sentiment. And if you did do something like that, then the card that I've been working on, I might put my sentiment like that. And that would bring in the green and also in the red. And then I could have some fun little decorations that would be coming off to the right. And on the other card, I will be using the gingham, and I can put that together as well. On the cards that I actually did finish to show you, I did use the background and the sentiments, and I decided I wanted a little bit more bling behind them. So I used some of the twine from the Simply Elegant trim and did some loops behind the sentiments. And then just put a little bit of tape in the middle of those loops. And I used dimensionals to add my double sentiment onto the front. And like I said before, the front of the card is one where you can definitely put more, and you could have thicker embellishments if you wanted to. I may add some of these gold leaves onto this card perhaps, and have a little bit of holly on the outside of that sentiment. And I also have some snowflakes, some white snowflakes that might get added to part of the front of this card, with the snowflakes perhaps being on the green on the front, just to bring out those colors. And then, like I said, I did add a little bit more embellishment to the center of these cards. I didn't want to add an awful lot, but I did put a little bit of the sparkle paper just as a strip down the center of each. Now, the last thing that I will say before kind of pausing on this particular design is when you look at this, you may be wondering, where in the world would I put a greeting? Where would I, put a message and sign my name and all of that? Because there's really not a great place to do it on the inside. The front is not really appropriate. So what I would recommend is, if you wanted to use this and put a greeting, that you would cut out a piece of paper, maybe the color of the designer series paper, maybe a piece of white, and not necessarily the exact size of the card, because then you're going to take away some of the designer series paper design on the back, and write your message and then adhere it to your card. If you put it on your card and then write, you may find that with the different thicknesses on the inside, that your writing is going to have little bumps in it, if you know what I mean. So that's what I would suggest. Or put a letter in with your card and have this be kind of standalone. So that's the design, and I really hope that you give this a try. It is a great way to get rid of, that's a horrible way to say it, to use some of that designer series paper that we all hoard, and to go back and look at the paper that you have from last Christmas, or maybe even the Christmas before. I have that, maybe even the one before that, and get those papers out and make some pretty cards. Experiment with the shape, the size of your tunnels, and experiment with the way that you orient your cards. You can easily change this to be horizontal rather than vertical, and I'll give you the dimensions to do that. So the sky's the limit on this one, and I hope you like it.